Welcome to another episode of Healing Through Love. Each week, we share ideas, experiences, and resources to increase the awareness of domestic and family violence and to empower survivors to grow and thrive. We talk with experts who share their advice, or with people who have experienced abuse, no matter where they are on their journey. This is all about healing through love. And now, here are your hosts, Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson.
The Healing Through Love podcast with host Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson would love to acknowledge Global Glamping Charities Incorporated for generously supporting this podcast. Global Glamping Charities, solving homelessness in all of its forms. Reach out to them at globalglamping.org. The Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. In episode 53, Precious Stepney shares with us how we can use yoga to relieve the trauma symptoms in our bodies.
What happens in yin yoga is that it allows the stretches allow the fascia, right? The muscles, the tendons to actually begin to stretch just a little bit. So even in, let's say, a cat-cow, right? So in cat-cow, you're on your hands, you're on your knees, and then you're moving and you're flexing. And how that connects to trauma, we know, right? We know trauma is stored in the body, right? It becomes a part of us. And taking the opportunity to talk about our trauma is one way of releasing, allowing our body to stretch and acknowledging what comes up through journaling. Could be another way of releasing, or even taking whatever comes up and making a creative outlet, is another way of getting it out of the body. Because also
the Healing Through Love podcast with Sharlene Lynch and Rose Davidson. Hello and welcome to the Healing Through Love podcast. I'm your host, Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com. The Healing Through Love podcast is here to empower survivors of family and domestic violence and bring them a soft place to land by having our guests share their journeys and share their skills and knowledge around how you can help yourself to become the person that you're meant to be. And other than the podcast, we also hold annual Pamper days for victims, survivors of domestic and family violence. These are free events where business owners come together and share their resources and knowledge for the day with our attendees, and so that the attendees can have a joyous day of love and nurturing. If you want to reach out and become and want to know more about our Pamper Day events, which we are hoping to hold on a global basis, you can reach out to hello@htlaustralia.org. And Australia is spelled Australia. My guest today is Yakira Eden, and we're going to be discussing all things yoga, leadership, and meditation. Now, Yakira Eden, she's going to explore with us the mental fog and how we can overcome this through yoga and activities that support our remembering and the gathering of our pieces together so that we become a whole. She's also the author of Spiritual Guide to Overcoming 7 Mental Ailments, which is available on Amazon. She's also the author of Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. That uses this and other strategies to assist with leadership development, life coaching, and personal wellness. And True Health Life podcast co-host. And she's a yoga enthusiast who lives to share on all things that about all the topics that we're going to discuss today and a lot more. Yakira Eden, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So what brought you on your journey of, yoga and spiritual enlightenment?
Absolutely. So I'll say that my career, well, I spent about 25, 26 years in the behavioral health setting in the United States, in New York. And during that time, just as a support mechanism, you tend to pull on different modalities. And the one that I would often lean to and then eventually really began to focus on was stretching, right? So I know we may think of yoga and think of all of the different modalities and the different type of yoga that is available, but ultimately it is really just being able to stretch the body in order to allow our mind to also expand and stretch. My experience, and so I know you touched on the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. I did not author that. So in fact, the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt is a manufacturing tool. Yeah, it's a Toyota. It started in the manufacturing industry, but shifted into banking and healthcare as a means by which to ensure that you're error proofing and creating as few redundancies as possible. But what I found is that woven within those techniques were actually life hacks that if we implemented could actually help improve outcomes even within the home or navigating our schedule or even, keeping a level of mental clarity. So I functioned, my last role in the healthcare setting was as a CEO of a psychiatric hospital, which was extremely rewarding. But it was also very challenging because it made very clear to me there was a huge work-life imbalance that caused a lot of stress and angst for myself. And so I had the opportunity or was instructed to, consider how I could make a transition, and I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yoga is, thought to be something for, trendy, upper class, millennials, so, what types of, do you have to be very limber to, undertake yoga, or does it help you become more stretchy?
Right. So it's so interesting that you say that. Yes, yoga is kind of synonymous with a particular type of person, I think sometimes. But yoga, or just the ability to stretch one's body is not new, right? It's something that we can look on the walls and if we travel through any indigenous place, and you will see stretching and movement happening on those walls. As far as the need to be limber, no. What all you have to do is be willing to see where your body is currently. So and although we're talking about yoga, I want to just conjure an image of simply sitting, right? Simply sitting with your legs directly out in front of you. It can be as simple as making the commitment to sit where your tailbone is directly connected to the floor and your legs are just stretched out in front of you, where you're engaging every part of your body in sitting. That doesn't require a lot of stretching, but it will help you recognize where your shoulders are in proximity to your core, right? And how your hip flexors feel in that moment. Even down to extending your toes and engaging them, recognizing that they're even there. And maybe being able to say, you know what, there's a lot of tension in my lower back. What might that be? And just giving yourself the time to sit in your body, if you will. So yes, we can get into, elaborate stretches or asana, if you will, but it doesn't have to be that complicated at all. It can be really simple.
So I guess as far as people who've come through a trauma, as domestic violence or family violence for that matter, how can they use yoga to, stretch their mind and find that inner peace?
Sure. So that's actually exactly what I cover in my book, Scriptural Guide to Overcoming 7 Mental Ailments. I walk you through a series of different challenges that we all face. And that's the thing. Although my background is mental health, mental ailments, right? Things like angst and worry and fear, and mental fog, those are much more common. They're not clinical diagnoses, and as such, they're oftentimes much more pervasive as well. We don't necessarily go around sharing how fearful we are just to get things done. The narrative of, no, I'll definitely fail. I'll do this podcast and I'm going to not have the answer. I will not seem like an expert. And why bother? Right? So why do it? And when we push past that, right? So if I sit with that and, well, let's choose the first. So we sit with it and we accept that. I accept that. And I cancel. I don't show up for the podcast or whatever the experience is. And then they're not, right? Because there was all this worry, and now that's going to now carry through my day. So now I might feel guilty because I've stood you up and didn't show up for my commitment. And that cycle continues. So what you can't, well, one, the type of yoga that I thoroughly enjoy is yin yoga. And when I was looking into modalities of yoga to explore, I actually had not heard of yin yoga.
I've not heard of it either.
Oh, so yeah, wonderful. So I get to share a bit. So as we know, there is that duality of yin and yang, right? That those two energy forces. And yin, well, I'll start with yang. Yang is more active. That's the masculine force, right? That's the light or the white side of the yin yang. And yin, which is more internal or more feminine, it's a slower type of cooler even, right? Because we know yang is that heat or fire energy. And so so if you think of hatha yoga or even like doing sun salutations, that is all yang energy. So it warms the body up. You're constantly moving in and out of asanas. And you tend to build a bit more muscle if you're very committed to that journey. But in yin yoga, it is much slower. So in my book, I introduce a few yin stretches, and you hold those positions for 3 to 10 minutes. Now that may seem like a lot, but what I will say is it is not. What happens in yin yoga is that it allows the stretches allow the fascia, right? The muscles, the tendons to actually begin to stretch just a little bit. So even, let's see. So if I'm thinking, so even in, let's say, a cat cow, right? So in cat cow, you're on your hands, you're on your knees, and then you're moving and you're flexing. In cat cow, you'll keep that position. So, but instead of constantly shifting from cat into cow, you'll actually do it much slower and much more intentionally, really acknowledging the stretch and the movement. And what you'll find is as you do it, the slower you are, the more deep the stretch will become, and your range of motion increases as well. And how that connects to trauma, we know, right? We know trauma is stored in the body, right? It becomes a part of us. And taking the opportunity to talk about our trauma is one way of releasing, allowing our body to stretch and acknowledging what comes up through journaling could be another way of releasing, or even taking whatever comes up and making a creative outlet, is another way of getting it out of the body, because ultimately that's what we want, right? We want to expel what should not be there anyway.
Absolutely, yes. And as someone who's lived through, traumatic childhood experiences, I can vouch for, various parts of my body are still holding on to the pain and the trauma, and it's quite difficult to get rid of, especially if I'm under a little bit of stress at the time, whether it be financial stress or family worries or whatever it is. But yeah, I do notice parts of my body get very sore, and I find it difficult to move. And it's like, I'm only, early 60s, but I feel sometimes like I'm, 80, because, my body just won't move the way I want it to. It's very frustrating. So I get that. And so, people who say that trauma isn't stored in the body, I think, I don't think they know what they're talking about, or they haven't had a traumatic experience in their life. So what other techniques can, people use to relax the mind and come into one?
Sure. Having a daily routine, I think, is really, really essential. I'll share a bit of what I found really, really helpful. So waking up in the dawning and setting an expectation for your day. I practice something called commanding my day. So oftentimes we know what the world expects of us, right? So our employer expects us to be at a particular place at a specified time. We may have children to drop to school, and that all is based on a schedule. We may prioritize ourselves, right? We may work out in the morning, in the dawning. But waking up early enough to allow for even 20, 30 minutes to just sit quietly and offer gratitude or affirmation, acknowledging whatever your spiritual indoctrination has you acknowledge for the day. And then saying, okay, what do I want to get done today? What do I want to do as far as my personal development today? And it could be, I have 30 minutes where I sit in traffic, so I'm going to listen to a particular podcast, or I'm going to listen to a book, and what was that yin yoga thing? Let me listen to something talking about that. So that's one thing that we can do. Oftentimes sitting in meditation, even if it's just for a few minutes, and not necessarily thinking that your mind is going to be quiet, because that is not always possible, right? And for some, it's never going to be possible, but you can find something that allows your conscious mind to not impede that subconscious. So for some, it may be dancing. For others, it could be pottery. Acknowledge what that special thing is that helps you get out of your active mind, and commit to doing it, even if it's one time per week. But do it intentionally. So do it and then recognize that, I'm going to keep my journal close, or I'll have my phone. And if a thought comes up or a feeling comes up, I'm going to just record and acknowledge that. Because oftentimes, I would say, much like our children, the things that sit with us really just want to be acknowledged. This is happening right now. I am a little nervous right now. Well, what are we nervous about? And just kind of pull that thread, ask yourself the 5 whys, right? Well, why is that? And just see what comes up. And write very freely, without judgment, just kind of free write. And maybe you want to go back and read it. Maybe you don't have to go back and read it. It's really up to you. But those are just a few strategies that we can use to open ourselves up a bit more. Yeah.
And quite often when we've been through trauma, we tend to shut our mind off, and the subconscious is never quiet. So we find, traumatic experiences popping up for no reason, conversations, actions, pop up out of nowhere. And so having those quiet times where you can actually still the subconscious as well, and just tell it to go back in its box for a little while and don't bother me, is always a good practice. But you're right, you need to deal with it. You need to find out why it's popped up. So what's triggered that particular memory or emotion, and figure it out, because that's a way of doing the inner work, isn't it, for self-growth and peace of mind, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever we think about, you mentioned peace of mind, just the idea of getting out into nature, right? How no matter the weather, no matter, if you have to bundle up, that experience, the cold, right? The experience of the cold, or whether you can, it's warmer where you are, getting outside into nature. And from a gratitude perspective, like keeping a gratitude journal, being able to acknowledge the thing that you are grateful for, whether it's for the day or in that moment. Oftentimes, I know you can get really overwhelmed just in day-to-day life, and you want to be alone, but then you really don't. Then you feel a little lonely. So what I find is going out into nature and sitting. You get to experience all of what is around you. And there's actually an exercise in the book where it's actually touching on the idea of being alone versus lonely. And, the charge is, I want you to set the intention of being alone, but go into nature and recognize, just sit and acknowledge how many birds, how many butterflies come to visit you. Observe just the abundance that is around, and then consider how we ever really can be alone, right? When we're feeling lonely or kind of desolate, there are always opportunities to connect. And if we choose to accept those opportunities, then we get to experience love, right? Because love is a connection. And that's ultimately what we all would like to have, right? That's a part of this human experience. So being able to connect in nature helps us see how we can connect with one another much more organically than social media may tell us, right? There's no script for just smiling and greeting someone. There's nothing, you don't need a hashtag for that. We can just do it and maintain human connection that way.
Yeah, I love to sit out in nature, and the smells is just divine. Here in Australia we have eucalypt trees, and the smell of them, and mixed in with the pine trees, and moss, and the river, and oh my God, it's just so amazing. I love it.
Did you say eucalyptus trees? That's amazing.
Yeah, the little stream, and just hearing it stream bubbling away. It's amazing. I love it. I think it's such a magical place. You just, sometimes I just never want to leave there. I think it's so nice. It's just leave the world behind and just stay there.
Yes. We find our oasis sometimes in nature, and it's like, okay, I can just be here for hours.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. Precious, Yakira Eden, I should say.
Sure.
What else can we do as humans to, help us connect to others, especially if we've been through some, traumatic experience?
Yeah. I think just being open is something that we can do. Oftentimes, one, we don't create opportunities to even connect. So one thing that we can all do is identify what our passions are and connect with others that share a similar interest. sometimes you don't recognize that those are the bridges that kind of get us to one another. If you're interested, I know I love pottery. I didn't know that I was creative and would love pottery, but being able to go to different pottery studios and interact with other people, I get to have different experiences. I would say also, if you have a spiritual community, being able to connect and volunteer yourself even is often a great way of connecting with others. But really just getting out, right? Getting out physically, it helps us to get out of our head, because often our thoughts, right? We know our thoughts become the reality around us. So if we're able to get out and engage with others more, it creates more plasticity, right? So we're not as stuck or as stagnant, and therefore we recognize, I can't go sit and talk to my neighbor. I wave, but I never actually walk across the street and just sit down for a moment, to even discover all that we have in common, or what led us to this community, right? And in community, it's like common is in there, but we never acknowledge something brought us together. Something all led us to this particular location in this time of our lives. Though we may look different, what were those things? Let's figure that out so that we can connect. So that the millennial can share yoga techniques that actually work for someone who may think, no, that's not a thing for me, right? It's really just getting out, I would say, and connecting.
Absolutely, yeah. Connection is one of the greatest things that we can do, and closing yourself off really is doing you more harm than it is good. And you've got to overcome that fear of leaving your sanctuary and venturing out into the world, because you never know what you might find out there. You could find some very pleasant surprise.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Precious, sorry, I love the name. So
it's fine.
Where can so your book's on Amazon, and you've where else can they find the book?
Sure. So you can find the book on Amazon. There's also a Kindle edition. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can access the book for free. Presently, that is where you can find the book. So it's Scriptural Guide to Overcoming 7 Mental Ailments. And like I said, it's not, we delve into scripture, but I also identify remembered activities or activities to help us remember, right? So remember, pull the parts, and you said it earlier in your opening, pull the parts of us back together again. Often we become so disjointed and disconnected. As you touched on, you can feel tension and knots in certain parts of the body and not really recognize or fully identify, how did this get here? Why is it here? Why am I able to get a massage and have it go away, and then it comes right back? And in the remembered exercises, we really go through lots of journaling, also some breathing or pranayama techniques that can help you settle into the body. So there's stretching, there's activities for how you can engage in your community, as well as scripture. So yeah.
Wonderful. So go over and head over and find her book, and I'm sure it will be an absolute bonus for people who are looking for ways to get out of their not the oneness, but the isolation that they may be feeling themselves in at the moment. Precious, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've loved meeting you and chatting with you.
Thank you for having me. This is lovely.
Bye-bye for now.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Healing Through Love. You can get further resources, see the show notes, or simply reach out to us via our website at htlaustralia.org. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to your company next time on the Healing Through Love podcast.